It is perhaps difficult now to remember the violent passions of that moment. We were a divided nation, and in Washington the division was roughly along party lines. Listen to the bitter voice of Congressman Joe Martin.
It is a black page in American history when a Dean Acheson triumphs and a Douglas MacArthur falls.
And here is Democratic Senator Ernest McFarland.
The civilian, not the military, must be the source of final authority, or we would have fallen under military dictatorship long ago.
There was something akin to frenzy in the greeting General MacArthur received from the American people. It was as if a great dam had stored up so much emotion that it simply had to burst forth. NBC correspondent Merrill Muller was at the airport when the MacArthurs arrived in San Francisco.
The General and Mrs. MacArthur are now walking directly in front of me. The 6th Army flag is dipped in salute to General MacArthur, and the Stars and Stripes wave in this soft night air while a three-quarter moon beams down from above, and it's a perfect evening for General MacArthur's arrival home. Here is General MacArthur. General MacArthur.
I can't tell you how good it is to be home. For long, dreary years, Mrs. MacArthur and myself have talked and thought about this moment. But now that it's come, the marvelous hospitality and the wonderful reception that this great city has given us has made it seem even more delightful than we had anticipated. Thanks, we'll not forget it.
This was the hero of the Pacific, who had not set foot on American soil for 20 years. Every city in the nation wanted to do him honor, wanted to look at him and hear him speak, wanted to feast him, wanted to parade for him. There was something close to ecstasy in the voices of those who had come near him. Listen to some of the voices.
Oh, it's just marvelous. I've never seen anything like it in my life. The biggest day I've ever been at.
My reaction is the greatest man that ever lived, a soldier and a gentleman.
Oh, let's not forget General MacArthur and all the wonderful work that he's done.
For many people, the big moment of the year was hearing General MacArthur speak to Congress. The speech in which he justified his actions on military grounds and ended his military life. This was the climax.
Old soldiers never die. They just fade away. I like the old soldier of that ballad. I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye.
It was a unique moment in American history, and such was the emotional quality of it that an old barracks room ballad, Old Soldiers Never Die, went to the top of the hit parade because General MacArthur had mentioned it. Vaughn Monroe, for example, sold thousands of copies of his Victor record.
Fading away. Old soldiers never die, never die, never die. Old soldiers never die, they just fade away.
Now it is late June 1951. The emotion over General MacArthur will abate somewhat now because there is a new moment of drama. Its author is Jacob Malik, Russian delegate to the United Nations Security Council.
The Soviet peoples further believe that the most acute problem of the present day, the problem of the armed conflict in Korea, could also be settled. This would require the readiness of the parties to enter on the path of a peaceful settlement of the Korea question. The Soviet peoples believe that, as a first step, discussions should be started between the belligerents for a ceasefire and an armistice.
From the very beginning, the negotiations with the Chinese and North Korean communists proceeded with a bad limp. And at one juncture, they broke down completely. This is from a broadcast over the UN radio in Japan.
The armistice talks at Quezon were declared, quote, off from this time, unquote, by the communists.
following an alleged bombing attack on the conference site. The liaison officer's report, based on investigation on the spot but in darkness, clearly suggests the whole incident is a frame-up, staged from first to last.
By lying, evasion, and obstruction, the communists tried to see how far they could push us. But we would not accept the responsibility for ending the chances of peace, however slim these chances. Late in the year, a ceasefire line was agreed upon, and an order went down to the troops.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just returned with the first notice of the ceasefire. I want to relay it to you so you can immediately get it to your platoons. There'll be no more raids by us. We send out no more combat patrols. Prior approval on a combat patrol, when it is sent out, will have to be approved by Corps level. Reconnaissance patrols will be utilized only to maintain contact with our enemy. We will fire only in self-defense and defense of the main line of resistance, or in the event the enemy starts building up a troop concentration to our front.
Was there actually a ceasefire order? Our highest officials told us no such order ever was issued, but you have just heard the evidence for yourselves. At any rate, the fact is that a comparative calm fell over the fighting front. But even in a comparative calm, men continue to die. We do not know when or whether there will be peace in Korea. We only know there is no peace in Korea now.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Most professional newsmen will tell you that the dismissal of General MacArthur was the biggest news story of the year. But that is not so in the borough of New York known as Brooklyn. We took our voices and events recording gear to Roey's Tavern, a Brooklyn neighborhood establishment on the corner of Clarkson and Rogers Streets. Our question, what do you think was the biggest news story of the year?
Well, I think the fact that the Brooklyn's lost the pennant was about the biggest news story of the year because it pushed all the foreign news, the happenings in Korea and everything else off the front pages. Geez, I don't know what happened there. They were winning by so much, and all of a sudden they blew it. The Giants must be a better team.
I know it's a story, brother. You're talking to a man that's practically gone home relief from it. I work in back of Ebbetsfield. Brother, I went out and got a suit made up, tailor-made. The business went and the suit went.
I think it's the biggest story in New York. Oh, we were in the bag. We had it. With 13 games ahead. We couldn't lose. Well, Leo DeRocha showed us that he moved from Brooklyn to New York, that's all.
Everyone in Roey's remembered the big day, the sad day, when Bobby Thompson hit that home run and made the Giants the National League champions.
I turned on the radio in the tailor shop, and they're bringing in a new pitcher. And he said Branca. And he pitched that second ball, and he hit it. I knew it was gone. And I'm from Brooklyn. After all, I was dejected. I was out, and I'm walking around with my head down now.
I was in the store, and Branca come in to pitch. And that was a blow. We had discussion. Well, each and every one had a different opinion, you know, what they should have done. They said, this guy's a bum. This guy's a bum. He didn't manage right, didn't use his head. Well, I was depressed. It was shocking.
Lost $75 that afternoon. I lost that game up in the Giants. I swooned. I fell over the bar, damn near dead. I pretty dropped dead. I give the guy the $75 back. He had already given it to me.
And there was another big baseball story this year. Joe DiMaggio, his place secure among baseball's immortals, announced his retirement. Listen to his curtain speech.
You all know I've had more than my share of physical injuries and setbacks during my career. In recent years, these have been too frequent to laugh off. When baseball is no longer fun, it's no longer a game. And so, I've played my last full game.
This was the year the United States took on the job of rearming not only itself, but the entire Western world. W. Chaplin has covered that story from the beginning of the year to the end. Mr. Chaplin.
This year, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization became more than a paper organization. A beginning was made toward transforming it into a formidable military organization. But, and this is a big but, it was only a beginning. The man chosen to head the NATO armies was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Early in the year, immediately following his appointment, he took off for a flying tour of the NATO capitals in Europe.
I believe that this movement among the Western democracies, in which I now have been assigned a post, is one for the preservation of peace and nothing else. If it has a belligerent purpose or attitude, no one has expressed that to me, and I would think it would be defeated from the start. I'm leaving here at noon on Saturday to make an exploratory trip. I hope to visit every capital of every nation. Among the purposes of that visit will be to reassure myself that I am not working at cross purposes with anybody, but that in every capital is shared my belief in what we're trying to do and my convictions as to what must be done if it's to be a success.
I was the only reporter who accompanied General Eisenhower through every stop of that frenzied tour. France, Belgium, England, the Low Countries, Scandinavia, Italy, and Luxembourg. In the larger capitals, there was carefully planned communist opposition to NATO and to Ike, but it melted to a mere muted snarl under the overwhelming cheers of the vast majority. I think Ike started that tour with crossed fingers, but he ended it with full confidence that the West would rally to his leadership. General Eisenhower returned home to find a great debate in progress over the extent of America's role in world preparedness. Listen to Senator Hickenlooper sparring with Secretary of State Dean Acheson during the hearings.
Well, I'm trying to find out whether this is only the camel getting its head under the tent and whether the 4 divisions will require 6 more and then the 10 will require 12 more and where we're going, what we have to look forward to. I'm wondering where the end of this matter is and whether or not, in the long run, we will be put into the inevitable position of assuming the primary responsibility for the land defense of Europe.
Senator, I think you're asking me quite impossible questions. I don't know. In the first place, you say, are we going to be asked to take over the land defense of Europe? The answer is, of course we're not going to be asked to take over the land defense of Europe. If you ask me whether in the future you may be asked to send more than 6 divisions, how can I possibly answer that? I suppose if there's war, you will. Maybe if the situation gets better, it will be less. Maybe if it stays the same, it'll be the same. Maybe if it gets more tense, there may be some additions to it. This is quite out of my field. I'm not able to tell you.
The administration defined this as a military problem, but that did nothing to mitigate congressional opposition to Secretary Acheson. The late Senator Wherry, a casualty of the year, was one of those most strongly opposed.
A large percentage of the people know, in view of the present precarious international situation, with its terrific impact upon our domestic economy, that Dean Acheson has failed miserably as Secretary of State. The Republican members of the Senate and House adopted a resolution saying, Mr. Acheson has lost the confidence of the American people, and Mr. Acheson must go.
As the year ends, Secretary Acheson still holds office, and friends of the administration may point to our growing strength as evidence that his policies are paying off. Part of that growing strength is in the increased potential of our atomic weapons. What you are hearing now is the actual sound of an atomic explosion early this year in the Nevada desert. This dramatic explosion rocked the walls of Las Vegas gambling houses. It broke windows and crockery, but the men of the American Far West are sturdy men, not easily perturbed even by an atomic bomb. Here is this one.
Well, I was making my rounds about 5:45. Got a blinding flash in the eye, and I batted my eyes about like a toad would in a hailstorm. I raised my head and looked up to the west and north, and I see a big white sheet hanging in the sky, so I just surmised then that must be the atomic bomb.
Following the Nevada atom tests, there was guarded talk of atomic artillery and of other secret atomic weapons suitable for tactical use on the battlefield. We were cautioned that such developments are still some time off. Our actual battle strength is still in conventional weapons and in the foot soldiers who use them. The growing NATO force in Europe is still small in numbers, but it is well equipped and physically hard. These are maneuvers near the Czechoslovakian border. The men who covered them for us are Charlie and Gene Jones, the fabulous TV cameraman.
The sergeant is giving some orders to his tank crew.
Range 1-200. Tank. Fire.
Our M26 tank, mounting a 90mm rifle, has just opened fire upon the aggressive force. That's our 50 caliber atop the tank. Opening fire, the aggressive force is larger than bursting. We're laying down a very fine field of fire on the aggressive force.
Here comes one of our troopers now. He's coming over. What is your name, buddy?
Private Hale.
What outfit are you in, Private?
1st Division.
What do you think about this situation? Is the division ready?
Well, we're pretty close to the Czechoslovakia border, and I think if they ever came over here, the Russians, we'd give them a good battle, just like they are over in Korea.
Here at home, for the first time in history, we sent troops in after an atomic explosion. They were astonished, perhaps, but unafraid.
We were seated on the ground and told to face away from the blast. From the time we saw the flash, it was about 25 seconds till we heard the blast. They counted off the seconds and then said bombs away. It was a terrific blast. I've never seen anything like it in my life. It was really something to see. The cloud started when the fireball, when you first seen the fireball, the cloud sort of looked like a donut and rose up and spread out all over and drifted over by us. Well, I couldn't say how high, but it must have been a mile wide anyway.
As this year ends, it could be said that the most notable fact is a negative one. We have still managed to avoid another great world war. The pessimistic may point to the many setbacks, the delays, the tax burdens, which it is hard to balance with achievements already gained. But the more hopeful see the horizon brightening ahead of us. One of these is Secretary Acheson. In a pre-Christmas news conference, he said that Europeans have made more progress toward unity in the past 4 years than they did in the previous 5 centuries. Both the pessimists and the optimists can make telling points from the record, but the weight of evidence would seem to lie with the more hopeful. The gain to date has perhaps not been great, but a start has been made. A foundation has been laid on which a permanent structure of security and peace can, with goodwill, be built.
Thank you, Mr. Chaplin. And now we have one more major story left to tell. It's a story that begins with a question. Who is going to be the next President of the United States? Democratic Senator Paul Douglas of Illinois outlined the qualifications he thinks a man should have to run for the job of president.
The job is really an impossible job, and it calls for the brooding qualities of Lincoln, the philosophic depth of Jefferson, the sturdiness of Cleveland, the daring of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the popular leadership qualities of Theodore Roosevelt. In addition, he must be a spiritual leader. He needs the patience of Job, and must have the physique either of a Sandow, a Samson, or a Charles Atlas. Any man who wants to be president of the United States ought to have his head examined.
Fortunately for the future of our country, there are a number of people who, in Senator Douglas's terms, ought to have their heads examined. One such is Mr. Republican, Senator Robert Taft.
I'm going to run because I believe I can conduct the only kind of campaign which will elect a Republican to office. I do not underestimate the difficulties of electing a Republican president against the automatic propaganda of a great administration machine supported by taxpayers' money. But I am convinced that a great majority of the American people today believe fundamentally in those principles which the Republican Party can present to them. I feel confident, therefore, that I will be nominated and elected.
Republican Governor Earl Warren of California is offering himself as a compromise candidate for the Republican nomination.
Republicans must search for common ground on which we can stand. This is no time to disagree on small things or to break up on the rocks of personal interest. There is a great field for solid agreement and solid accomplishment among Republicans without sacrificing the principles or conscience of anyone. I shall try to be helpful in this regard.
The third Republican candidate officially in the field is Harold Stassen.
I will present to the people that platform which I fervently believe that America should adopt in 1952, and I will give my approval on that platform for the presentation of my name as a candidate for president in 1953.
In addition, there is support for such men as New Jersey Governor Alfred Driscoll, Illinois Senator Everett Dirksen, and Oregon Senator Wayne Morse. But it was for New York's Governor Thomas E. Dewey to make the announcement early in the year that a great number of Republicans awaited.
I am definitely and finally removed. I removed myself by a letter. About 18 months ago, and that is beyond consideration. I would recommend to the New York delegation that they support General Eisenhower for president if he would accept the draft.
Jack Began, NBC correspondent in Rome, reported on good authority that General Eisenhower will announce his candidacy during the forthcoming NATO meeting in Portugal. Pennsylvania Senator James Duff has already opened Eisenhower for President headquarters, and he thinks he's found his campaign platform in the news of the past year.
The present party in power in Washington has become corrupt, and it is imperative at a time when America exercises the leadership of the world that we stand for honest government as well as liberal government. And the present administration is tagged with the fact that there's been rottenness all through it, and therefore we must have a change.
Many leading Republicans feel they have winning issues for 1952 in the government scandals and in administration handling of Far Eastern policy and the MacArthur affair. But President Truman opened his political defense for 1952 recently when he addressed the women's Democratic clubs in Washington.
I venture to predict that there's going to be more money spent in trying to defeat the Democratic Party next year than has ever before been spent in any election in the history of this republic. And that's not all. The opposition is sure to be fully equipped with slick public relations counselors and gigantic national advertising campaigns. The art of misrepresentation can be expected to reach new heights, if that's possible.
None of the Democratic candidates for 1952 is out in the open. Straws in the wind point to such men as Chief Justice Fred Vinson, Tennessee Senator Estes Kefauver, Georgia Senator Richard Russell, James A. Farley, and Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas. But what about President Harry Truman? Senator Paul Douglas, making it clear that he himself does not want to be president, expressed this opinion on Harry Truman.
Well, I would not say that he is a candidate, but I think that he is underneath the mistletoe, and that he is in a position to be kissed, so to speak, by the various Democratic leaders who go in to see him. If he is nominated, I will support him.
And so the story of politics in 1951 must end the same way it began, with a question: who will be the next president of the United States?